Hey, once again, good morning and Boker Tov. I'd like to start with a topic that I hope none of us will be involved in directly, just, theoretical exploration without hoping, hoping that we won't have to apply it to ourselves. Uh, it's the section, or one of the sections in this week's Parsha of Mishpatim, which talks about potentially suffering a loss, a monetary loss, which could even lead possibly to a loss of life. It revolves around the laws of a thief. I'm going to read the verse too in Hebrew and English momentarily, and want to alert you that this exploration will be beneficial to us to understand the role and the importance of our oral law and traditions, and not just the black and white of the text. So chapter 22 in Parshat Mishpatim opens up as follows. Im b'machteret yimatzeh haganav. If the thief is found tunneling into your house or other parts of your property, breaking in, the huka vamet, and in the process of his breaking in to your house, say to the homeowner's house, that the homeowner assaulted the intruder and killed him. Ein lo damim. Literally, there's no blood here, meaning that the homeowner is not guilty of murder, but rather he'll be viewed as acting in self-defense. Continues the Torah, Im zacha hashemesh alav damim lo. But if the sun rose on him, as a homeowner encounters this person while it's daylight and kills the intruder, he will be guilty of murder. Just to finish the pasuk, Shalem Yishalem Ein Lo V'Nimkab Gnevato. But if he's not killed, then he's caught. He has to make restitution. Okay, so the second verse said, if the sun shone on him, then basically not allowed to kill him. What does that mean about the first verse? Well, what can be implied from the second verse to the first verse? You're welcome to unmute yourselves to respond.
Nighttime versus daytime. At nighttime, if you can't see him, that's one thing. In the daytime, if you can see him, that's a whole nother ballgame. You could defend yourself, you could talk to him, you could negotiate with him. But at night, he's coming in, you can't see anything, you're afraid for your life. That's my interpretation.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to want to divide your response, but I guess one has to be cautious though about negotiating with the intruder or thief, But everything by the circumstances. But just to look at what's definitely would be parallels, that since black and white in the Chumash, we're given the scenario in Pasuk Bet, in the second verse, that it was daytime. So we seem to understand that the implication is that the first verse is talking about nighttime. The fact that the Torah chose not to reveal that might help us to understand something that we're going to encounter momentarily. I just want to jot myself a note about that.
Rabbi, is that stand your ground?
Yeah, in terms of the nighttime, if we're going to just
What,
take that
Rabbi, what verses are you on?
chapter 22, verses 1 and 2.
Okay.
If we're going to take just the surface meaning and saying at night, so yes, I mean, a lot of states don't I know New York State law, at least years ago, was not parallel with the Torah law. The New York State law read more or less you have to be shot out first before you can defend yourself. But that's not the Torah's viewpoint. In fact, Rashi cites here from the Gemara Sanhedrin, Kan limdatcha Torah. From here, the Torah is teaching you, Im ba lahargecha hashkem lahargo. You know somebody is coming to kill you. Don't wait for him to shoot first. You're allowed to neutralize the threat. Now, if you can neutralize the threat without killing the person, so then we take that option. But if you can't
My dad, I'm gonna
neutralize,
stay here today. I'm gonna be a good daughter.
okay, Rebecca, please mute yourself.
Okay.
But if you can't, then the only way of defending yourself or preventing someone from still injuring you seriously, even if he's shot in the leg, you have to do to protect yourself according to the halacha. That person essentially would have the halacha of a rodef, of a pursuer. When somebody is pursuing another one to harm them, everybody is obligated to prevent that pursuer from attaining his goal. And again, by wounding, capturing if possible without danger, but if necessary, even by taking his life. So I don't know all the details of stand the ground per se, but again, but here Rashi says the Torah principle is teaching you that if you know somebody is on the way to do serious harm to you, don't wait around. Take action. Actually, obviously, you have to have good discretion when something really is a danger or not the danger. So we'll come back to Rashi, but I want to first share with you a comment of the Ramban, Nachmanides, who says as follows. We're just taking an excerpt from his comments, and please listen carefully. Ve'im zarcha hashemesh al haganav, and if the sun shine on the thief, ve'adam ro'ehu umakiro, and somebody else sees him and recognizes him. Not sure exactly what recognize means, at this point, but sees him. Lo yehareg, then he, the thief, should not be killed. Just, he pays, like the Torah, speaks about payment. So he pays what he needs to be paid. So what is the Ramban introducing here?
A witness. When you have a witness, someone else to observe it, it's again a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and why should that make it a different ballgame? Why? Why should that be a factor?
Because maybe that person could stop the thief too, as well as you. Not you could be both of you. You didn't have to.
Okay. Again, people need to be, if they're going to play that role, they need to know what they're doing, or else they can wind up with more damage than might have happened otherwise. But could be, could be. And anything else? So the Ramban himself, answers that v'zeh yivrach mimenu. So the intended thief is going to flee. He doesn't want to, end up in jail or necessarily with bodily harm. So in the daytime, but the Ramban does add something that's not in the Torah here, that the Ramban, says that in the daytime, he could be recognized, he could be seen, and that's going to cause him a situation where, even though it was daytime, but he wasn't necessarily, counting on that type of encounter, and he himself is not, he's into thievery, but he's not looking to get into a fight. So Rashi, I want to share more of Rashi with you. First, Rashi explains why the Gemara said that you should take the initiative to prevent someone from trying to kill you. Habala harguha, hashkemet lehago. So, while not Rashi and not the sages of the Talmud, that they're not advising somebody to engage an intruder physically, but there is human nature, as Rashi quotes it here. There are different ways of expressing it in rabbinic literature. Rashi on the pasuk says, "Sheharei yodehu she'ein adam ma'amid atzmo v'ro'eh shenotlim mamono b'fanav v'shotek," is that the thief who breaks in at night. What's one of the differences between nighttime and daytime for most people is that most people are home at night, and if it's if it's not COVID-19, they have a good chance that during the day they're out, and even during COVID-19. So a person who decides to break into somebody's house at night, he has to assume that A, the owner is in the house, and that B, either the process of breaking in or as he moves about the house might wake up the owner, and that he might have a face-to-face encounter with the owner. So if he's thought this through, if he's professional and he's thought this through, he's going to realize already he has to make, he has to have strategy. So once he's in that, in that position, he's going to know, to finish translating Rashi, right, that a person does not stand by while his assets are being taken from him. Now, again, it's not the advice that we should be that way. It's really not worth the risk of physically, for most people, to physically encounter a thief, to wrestle him down because you want to protect your money. It's a lot better to sacrifice the money. Maybe you get some of it back from insurance. Maybe it's recovered otherwise. Maybe it's not. But our lives are most important. But it's not the innate nature of the human being. The innate nature is to stand and defend your material property, your material assets. And the thief knows this. So he says, I hope everything goes smoothly, but if that guy wakes up, he's a goner. That's the position that we assume that the thief is coming in if he's breaking into the house at night when most people are home at that time. And Rashi, cites based on the Gemara, the Fichach Almanat Kein Ba. We have a right to assume that that's the condition on which he broke into our house. We don't have to interview him. We don't have to give him the benefit of the doubt. We have a right to apply what would be the case, what would be true in most cases. And since therefore the thief has made up his mind that if he has to, he's going to kill the homeowner has the right to take the initiative and not to start interviewing him, but just to neutralize him. Okay, so that's Rashi's first set of comments. On the phrase from the second pasuk, Im zachar hashemesh alav, if the sun shone on him, meaning that it's daytime, says Rashi, Ein ze ella kimin mashal. This is only an example that the Torah is using. And what does the example mean? You know, I was telling my wife a little while ago that I have two lights by my desk, and one is like a pure like white light, and the other was technically white, but still has like, you know, yellow haze. And this morning I felt I wanted to see, you know, clearer light, and I wasn't even thinking per se how clear the light is, but I thought it was like, you know, brighter, and I turned that on and off. It's like a, you know, like a whole different thing. The light. So it helped me to see things more clearly. Rashi says, seeing clearly is not just what we perceive with our eyes. Basically, I'm putting other words into Rashi to explain Rashi. It's not what we see, but it's how we interpret what we see as well. So that Rashi says, Im barur lecha hadavar sheyesh shalom imcha. If you know clearly, you know, just as the sky, the environment is clear, we can see through it. You know, we could see because the sun is shining, and we could see the situation. We could see the sun is considered as helping to bring peace to the world, also, and providing the light, and it's clear to the homeowner, the asset owner, that this person is just looking to make a few quick bucks, take something quickly, run away, and he doesn't really want to harm me. Maybe he's more scared of me than I'm scared of him even. Whatever the situation is, if it's clear that the intent is not to engage in a potentially physically damaging encounter, then you're not to kill him. Then Rashi gives it's an example on maybe on the extreme of the spectrum of clarity. Rashi says that if a father was the one who was breaking in to the son's house, tunneling in, so he's giving us those connotations of the first verse that it was nighttime. So says that a father has for his child, even the father, not just even the mother, but the compassion that the father has for the child, the father would never kill the child. I mean, unfortunately, we may hear some cases in society at large. I mean, but universally, it would be very, very rare. So it could be the father was somehow desperate for money, or felt that he was entitled to certain money that was in the house, or maybe breaking in for something else. So Barbara and I have a first time. He was living in Brooklyn at the time of this story, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, the window from a fire escape that was on the room that this fellow was resting in, sleeping, the window started to open, and this fellow went for his gun. And it turned out that it was a friend of his who came into town he didn't want to call, the resident, our friend, and he knew he's always welcomed in his house, and he wanted a place to sleep for a few hours before continuing his travels or whatever. And so he was trying to make a quiet entry and just go onto the couch and sleep, but he almost got shot because of it. And needless to say, he was put into that type of situation where he was armed and could have actually killed this person. And it's not like you're living out maybe in some quiet, rural neighborhood, and crime is very, very rare. You're living in a metropolitan area and in a place with significant crime rate. That was not a good move on that person's part. But let's say that happened to somebody, and they look and they say, "Oh my God, that's my good friend. That's my father." Whatever. Obviously, if you were to choose to shoot that person, you would not be left off the hook, because if you actually had time to see before you pulled the trigger, even though the person was entering your house without permission, but that the person wouldn't harm you, so you're not allowed to do that. So Rashi says that we're talking about symbolism here of clarity. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is, even though the second pasuk clearly identified that it was daytime. And we seem to agree that meant that the first pasuk was talking about night. But maybe now, this is what I was hinting to before, maybe now the fact that the Torah didn't specify that it was nighttime, just allowed us to assume that it's nighttime, was a way of opening up our eyes to the possibility that we're not talking just about light and dark, but we're talking about clarity, we're talking about understanding the situation and the likelihood of whether or not I am in physical danger or not. We're not talking about, with this friend of, who went up the fire escape and opened up a window, he wasn't intending on stealing anything. But even if somebody was stealing something, but you knew he was never going to harm you, like your parent. So that's a different scenario than what is expressed in the black and white of the Torah verse. Now, the Rambam basically agrees with Rashi, Maimonides agrees with Rashi, but one of the classical commentaries, I almost should say, academically aggressive against the Rambam, is the Ravid. So the Ravid is often standing in opposition to the view of the Rambam. And the Ravid says, he didn't make up the expression. It's an important expression to know within, say, Jewish scholarship. It says, the way the Ravid himself expresses the words, Eino yotze midei pishuto. You could say a lot of different things about the text, but when you have a text in the Torah, you have to recognize the simple black and white meaning of what's being written there. And therefore, the Ravid says, Bayom einu rasha lehargo. In the daytime, you're not allowed to kill this thief that broke in. I'm sorry, I forgot which time of the day I said, but just in case I'm looking at the words, I just want to make sure that the Rabbi is saying that if he broke in during the daytime, that you're not allowed to kill him, because in the daytime, if he would flee. It wasn't his intention to engage physically with the person. He assumed he wasn't home. So the Ravid, always says that during the daytime you can't kill the person. So, we might be asking, and the Maggid Mishnah, who is one of the key commentators on the Rambam, on Maimonides, says, it's like the rule that the Rabbi is trying to reinforce here of the text not departing from its literal meaning. It's just like there are clear agreed conflicts to that position. So for example, one verse from Sefer Devarim talks about two men who are having a fight, and the wife of one uh, is on the scene, and she goes and she grabs the person who is wrestling with her husband, and she grabs him in this private area. So the halacha says, unless that was the only way of saving her husband from harm, the Torah says the katsota et kapa, you chop off her hand. Now there's no way, halachically, that's what's meant. It's also symbolic. Some say that it's symbolic of a hand, like, a hand often is symbolic of our income. And so now she's going to have to pay a fine. But that verse, even though you find some societies that actually have a verse like that, you steal something, they cut off your hand. Code of Hammurabi, I think, was like that. But Rashi reminds us on the spot that this is talking about a monetary compensation for embarrassment. And that already has to be calculated, how embarrassing it was. It could be different for one person to another person. But it's a monetary consequence, not a physical consequence. In our own Parsha, we also have a reference to two people fighting, and this has to do, and there's a pregnant woman who's nearby, and she inadvertently even gets hit, damaged, even in her belly area. So there's discussion about that, of what type of compensations may be required. But that is followed by a rule that we may well be familiar with. In Hebrew, it starts off saying, ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein. An eye under an eye, or as we usually say, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And this, just as Rashi says over here, is like, say, if somebody blinded his fellow, he has to make financial compensation for the damage that he caused. But below ntilat eve mamash, but we're not talking about actually blinding the aggressor. This is monetary, and it's clear cut, and in fact, the Rav Soloveitchik pointed out that the Rambam's language, we're talking about this halacha is specifically on this halacha, is that we've seen all through history. He says, in the court of Yehoshua and his successes, is that we witnessed how this law was applied. Never was it applied in a physical way. So it's not just being politically correct these days. Within the Torah uses certain explanations, but they're not meant to be taken literally. So first, this was introduced by Rabbi Bazak as he was exploring the Ravid's attack that I shared with you a little while ago on the Rambam. That says, that the Torah doesn't leave its pshat. You can't take the plain meaning out of the verse. Well, sometimes it's just not so. sometimes, we're talking about the fact that there might be aspects like it might be that all the time, that daytime, you don't kill, someone who intruded. That might be like the default, but then you have to evaluate that as well. There could be things that could be added. There could be things that still remain from the black and white, but not necessarily, certainly not limited to it. And we have cases where the black and white definitely is not the interpretation. Rav Soloveitchik said that he said the reason that the Torah uses this stark language of an eye for an eye, etc., is that there really is no way of compensating for that type of loss. There are certain injuries that can be caused to somebody that no matter how much you pay, it's not really going to compensate for what was lost. And Rav Soloveitchik elaborated and said that we're not talking just about physical limbs or organs, is that those parts of our body that help us to appreciate the world around us, that also has like spiritual implications for us. So, we can wind up, if somebody, lost an arm because of an injury that was inflicted by another, whatever the physical loss may be, it might wind up limiting people's experiences of life in some measure. And the Torah keeps that language to say, you know what, really, you really, in some ways, you deserve, but you should understand that you cannot get away. Just like that you paid money, but you didn't fulfill the black and white requirement of what the Torah said. So the aggressor has to understand that even the money doesn't totally satisfy. Rav Soloveitchik also made note on this topic and said that it's not possible to actually execute the literal translation in a way that would be validated by halacha, by Jewish law. Because, if we go to the example of a hand, if a person lost the use of his hand or lost the hand physically, and then obviously, the loss of it, at least in a normal fashion, is that could be a big difference. Like say if the person is an artist versus a person who is a translator, at the UN, doing almost simultaneous translation. So the value of the hand would appear to have different impacts on each of those people. The same thing with, yes.
How do you determine the value? I mean, you see people suing, for loss of limb or whatever, millions and millions of dollars, or you'll see, you see also, I mean, how do you know how much it's worth? I mean, how does the Torah say to determine that? Value?
Well, right. So in some early sources, I think would be a little bit hard, to relate to, when there was like a slave market. So sometimes that provided, that was looked at providing a basis of what the market's going to go for, to get somebody, who's missing a hand versus someone who's not missing a hand, to see what kind of financial consequences there are. But it would have to be assessed. And in general, physical damage, of nezikin, damaging a person. So the aggressor, has various responsibilities, different categories. That sometimes they all apply, sometimes some of them apply, but there has to be compensation for medical bills. There has to be compensation for physical pain that was, suffered, not just at the time of the injury, but even during the recuperation, or if it's ongoing. Loss of income, was there also embarrassment there? So there are a lot of different factors that bona fide people have to make a calculation. But I think that Rabbi Soloveitchik is going to say that even all of that's done, though the Torah uses that stark language to remind us that, it's like hard to maybe to get ever to the right formula.
What happens if the person can't afford to reimburse somebody for an injury? What happens to that person?
Who's the lawyer of us? You're talking about in halacha? In halacha, then that person might have been, sold. He could sell himself to raise money. So maybe he could maybe he, if he has whatever skills that he has, so he can maybe commit himself to somebody else who pays him up front his salary, and then they uses that salary. That would be learned from from our Parsha as well, in terms of the Eved Ivri, of what we call a Jewish slave, that basically he was sold or is selling himself to come up with money that's needed, and he obligates himself to years of service for that. So perhaps a model like that could take place. I don't know what happens in the general courts. I guess somehow it's assumed that people have some type of income, most people, and wages can be garnished over a period of time. But I don't know what the legal proceedings are today in the secular society. But in the Torah scheme, so the consequences would need, to the best of human abilities, to be calculated out, and compensation would be owed.
Rabbi?
Yes.
In those cultures, I think there's still some exist, like the Karaites, who don't accept the oral law. Do they actually do these things?
I don't know. First of all, I would assume, if the Karaites are in Israel, so they're subjected to the law of the government in the land of Israel. And just even in America, not everything that we can, as a general rule, we say dina de malchuta dina, that the law of the land is the law of the land. I don't know, like if I were, God forbid, in a situation that somebody broke into my home and I saw that he had a lethal weapon, and if I were to have a lethal weapon or some means of neutralizing him, even permanently, I don't know if I could, in that circumstance, say, well, the law says he has to shoot first, so I'll see what happens if I can defend. I think it comes to life. I think that if a person could save himself, he should save himself and then face the consequences, afterwards, which won't be as permanent as if he doesn't take action. But as a general rule, we are supposed to obey the law of the land. But
I think in Florida, they actually passed that, I don't know, they call homeowners law or something, where if you feel like you're in trouble, you can shoot that person.
Yes, the stand your ground law in Florida. If someone's invading into your house and you feel endangered, that you're allowed to shoot first. But unfortunately, that law has been abused in Florida a few times.
Right. So we're not talking about abuse, but we're talking about the concept and the concept of being applied in a just way. And that's what the Torah is about.
The stand your ground law is not just for if someone breaks into your house, because in Florida there's a right to carry, and if you are carrying a gun and someone puts you in fear of bodily harm, you can actually use your gun anywhere.
Thank
Right.
you, Sarah.
So the concept of habala hashkem v'hargo, that if someone's trying to injure you, you should take initiative to be able to avoid that, and the parallel issue that if you see somebody who's in danger, again, not always easy things to figure out. You have to know that's really what's happening. What about someone who's running after somebody else because they forgot their keys to the car and they're jogging away, and the guy wants to catch up with him before it's too late? So we have to make sure that it's clear to us, as Rashi was saying, that clear that we're understanding the episode that we're witnessing. But as a general rule, we hold that one can violate 610 commandments in order to save one's life or somebody else's life who is in danger. the three commandments that we're not allowed to violate is idol worshiping, killing somebody else who's not guilty. The Gemara has a case that a government just out of a whim, he wants, the guy that lives in the third house on the block, I want you to kill him. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. You're not allowed to do that. The guy living in the third house did nothing wrong. It's just the governor wants to play games with Jewish life. The Roman governor, unfortunately, these cases, came up in history. So you're not allowed to commit murder, self-defense, whether it's literally myself or somebody else. We don't make that differentiation. If I'm able to save somebody else's life, that's my obligation. And then there would be certain of the sexual prohibitions could not be violated, but everything else could be violated. That's what we call pikuach nefesh. So whether I pikuach nefesh, my body, somebody else's body that's in danger, I'm supposed to protect him if he's innocent and being pursued by somebody else.
I hate to bring up a sensitive subject, but how about death penalty? I mean, does the Torah, I mean, you read on Yontif, it'll say, for there's a death penalty. You read on Yom Kippur, beheading, stoning. I forgot the other two.
Well, so the sources say that there's a difference of opinion about the source actually says, but I think the one that's quoted more often is that if a Beis Din, now a Beis Din was a court of 23 judges needed. These are righteous, pious people who have to have children of their own. You couldn't be a judge if you didn't have your own child. You can't judge a capital offense if you don't have your own child. You haven't brought your own child into the world. You can't make it be one of the body that makes the decision to take away somebody else's life. But they have to go if they have to go through rigorous cross-examination, assessment of the evidence. If a Beit Din of 23 sentence somebody to death even once in 70 years, it was called a murderous court. Another version says in 7 years. I mean, getting the acid, it was very, very hard. You could, the rabbis could decide instead to imprison the person, and if they were convinced that he really was guilty, but it was a technical differentiation, they could make the conditions difficult, and that would curtail his life. But it is very hard to convict somebody. I mean, talking about you have to have witnesses that are on the scene, that see each other, that warn the person that what he's about to do is wrong. And the person has to say, I'm still doing it. And said, if you do it, your punishment is going to be, execution. I don't care. So I mean, it's an unlikely, scenario really to come up with, but the concept is there. The concept of capital punishment is there. One other item is that if you have 23 judges, right? So if all 23 convict him, they find him guilty of the capital offense, all 23 find him guilty, you know what happens? He goes free. What? Like it doesn't smell right. It's not possible to have 23 judges looking at the evidence and for no one to see some window of, towards not being guilty as charged, or finding a weakness, and so it just doesn't make sense. There was a
that's the opposite though of a jury trial. You have to have everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, that's a topic for a different time maybe. But I just want to tell you, there was a fellow by the name of Peter Drucker. He was recognized internationally as a business management guru. And I listened to a tape from him once, and he said he used the Japanese board of directors as an example. He said that if in the Japanese culture, that if all the members at the board meeting agree that they table the issue until the next meeting when somebody's going to come in and argue it the other way. So that is, it may well likely have been taken from Jewish sources, because this is a very ancient sources. I understand that the Israeli army has something similar. They call him the 10th man. You know, we know that expression because it usually means we need one more for a minion. So if whoever is taking place in these conversations, that if the first 9 people all agree with one another, the 10th person is obligated to argue it the other way. It's sort of like being on a debate team and giving your side of the debate at last minute, you know, to come in and to argue it. So it's very, very important, you know, when we, you know, just because we have differences of opinion doesn't mean that we have to have what we call in the, you know, in the language, a machlokas. You know, people have machlokas that you know, it would be, I guess, the type of machlokas that's lo l'shem shemayim, not for the sake of heaven, where we say that, you know, Hillel and Shammai and their respective schools had a lot of disagreements, but they were always for the sake of heaven, and they even married each other, even though they didn't see eye to eye on what halacha, you know, always was. So, so having differences of opinion can actually strengthen the entire group, not just the ones that hold from the difference of the opinion. So we have to learn how to respect differences of opinion as well. But life is extremely, extremely holy. I mean, it has a whole implication in the whole world of medical ethics today, which often does, you know, as great as medicine is. And actually, I was speaking the other day with a renowned Jewish expert, accomplished Talmid Chacham, recognized expert in medical values, and he was speaking about the vaccine in a phone conversation. I asked him, he says, you know, American medicine is fantastic, you know, very, very, very sophisticated. But not everything in medical ethics reflects in line with this, the commitment to life, and doctors take their oath, you know, to promote life and not to harm life. But still, the Jewish position is, you know, really puts that on a pedestal. Life is a very, very special gift, and you know, we appreciate every moment of life that we have, and we are commanded to protect our own lives and also to protect the lives of others. Any other comments or questions? If not, we're going to wrap up for today. Any other comments? Well, thank you all for joining.